Namaskar students. Hope you are hale and hearty, taking care of your health and your studies. My name is Jyotsna and I am from Education Department, Chandigarh. While coming to the work this morning, I saw a quote behind a car. It stated, "My life, my rules." This quote gave a perfect start for the session today. The quotes like these mean that citizens are well aware of their rights. Modern day being the age of social media, if anyone is devoid of their basic human rights, we escalate the matter to the nation. And how? Through social media. We just post something which is breach of the human rights. And in no time that post becomes viral. The world knows about it. But can you imagine something of that sort around 100 years ago when our forefathers were there, somewhere at the beginning of 20th century? The answer would be no. There was a time when we as Indians were devoid of our basic human rights. We were not allowed to board a particular bogie in a train. We were not allowed to enter into the premises of a club. There were many things we were devoid of because we were Indians. For the rights which we enjoy today, our forefathers had fought a long battle. Today's session will revolve around that only. In today's session, we will take up Chapter 9 of Grade 8 book, Our Past Part 3, The Making of National Movement from 1870 to 1947. Without wasting any time, let's get going. In ancient times, people from all over the world were keen to come to India. The Persians, followed by Iranians and Parsis, immigrated to India. Then came the Mughals, and they too settled down permanently in India. Genghis Khan, the Mongolian, invaded and looted India many times. Alexander the Great too came to conquer India but went back after a battle with Porus. Columbus wanted to come to India but instead landed on the shores of America. Vasco da Gama from Portugal came to trade his country's goods in return for Indian spices. The French came and established their colonies in India. And lastly, the Britishers came and ruled over India for nearly 200 years. After the Battle of Plassey in 1757, the British achieved political power in India, and their paramountcy was established during the tenure of Lord Dalhousie, who became the Governor General in 1848. He annexed Punjab, Peshawar, and Pathan tribes in the northwest of India. And by 1856, the British conquest and its authority were firmly established. And while the British power gained its heights during the middle of 19th century, the discontent of the local rulers, the peasantry, the intellectuals, common masses, as also of the soldiers who became unemployed due to the disbanding of the armies of various states that were annexed by the British became widespread. This soon broke out into a revolt which assumed the dimensions of the 1857 mutiny. Now, the Indian independence movement was a series of historic events with the ultimate aim of ending the British rule in India. The movement spanned from 1857 to 1947. Let's start with the concept of emergence of nationalism. The Britishers were exercising control over the resources of India and the lives of its people. The consciousness began to be clearly stated by the political association formed after 1850, especially those that came into being in 1870s and 1880s. The more important ones were Pune Sarvajanik Sabha, the India Association, the Madras Mahajan Sabha, the Bombay Presidency Association, and the Indian National Congress. These associations functioned in specific parts of the country and their goals were stated as the goals of all the people of India. They believed that the Indian people should be empowered to take decisions regarding their affairs. In 1878, the Arms Act was passed, which disallowed Indians from possessing arms. During the same year, the Vernacular Press Act was enacted in an effort to silence those who were critical of the government. Under the Act, the government was allowed to confiscate the assets of newspapers, including their printing presses, if anything that was published was found objectionable. In 1883, the Ilbert Bill was introduced, which provided for the trial of British or European persons by Indians and sought equality between British and Indian judges in the country. The Indian National Congress was established in December 1885. The early leaders were Dadabhai Naoroji, Firoz Shah Mehta, Badruddin Tayyabji, W.C. Banerjee, Surendranath Banerjee, Ramesh Chandra Dutt, S. Subramanian Iyer, among others, largely belonged to Bombay and Calcutta. So there was a nation in the making. In the first 20 years, Congress demanded Indians in the government and in administration. It wanted the Legislative Council to be more representative, more powerful, and introduced in provinces where none existed. It demanded Indians to be placed in high positions in the government. The demand for Indianization of the administration was against racism, since most important jobs were monopolized by white officials. Indianization would reduce the drain of wealth to England. Other demands included the separation of the judiciary from the executive, the repeal of Arms Act, and the freedom of speech and expression. The Congress raised a number of economic issues. The British rule led to poverty and famines. They demanded reduction of revenue, cut in military expenditure, and more funds for irrigation. The Congress also passed many resolutions on salt tax, treatment of Indian laborers abroad, and the sufferings of forest dwellers. The modern leaders published newspapers, wrote articles, and showed how British rule was leading to the economic ruin of the country. They felt that the British had respect for the ideals of freedom and justice, and so they would accept the demands of Indians. Now came the big idea of freedom is our birthright. Many Indians raised the questions against the political style of the Congress. In Bengal, Maharashtra, and Punjab, leaders such as Bipin Chandra Pal, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, and Lala Lajpat Rai criticized the moderates for their politics of prayers and emphasized the importance of self reliance and constructive work. These three were well known as Bal, Pal, and Lal. Bengal got partitioned in 1905, which was the biggest province of British India. The British divided Bengal for the reason of administrative convenience. The British, instead of removing the non-Bengali areas from the province, separated East Bengal and merged it with Assam. The moderates and the radicals opposed the partition of Bengal. The vast protest and the large public meetings led to Swadeshi movement, strongest in Bengal and Deltic Andhra. It was known as Vande Mataram movement. The Swadeshi movement opposed British rule and encouraged the ideas of self-help, Swadeshi enterprise, national education, and use of Indian languages. Some individuals suggested that the revolutionary violence would be necessary to overthrow British rule. All India Muslim League was founded by a group of Muslim landlords and Nawabs at Dhaka in 1906. It supported the partition of Bengal. The League desired separate electorates for Muslims, a demand conceded by the government in 1909. The Congress split in 1907. After the split, the Congress came to be dominated by moderates with Tilak's followers functioning from outside. The two groups reunited in December 1915. The Congress and the Muslim League signed the Lucknow Pact and decided to work together for representative government in the country. Now came the growth of mass nationalism. After 1919, the struggle against British rule gradually became a mass movement involving peasants, tribals, students, and women in large numbers, and occasionally factory workers as well. After the First World War, India's economic and political situation got altered, which led to a huge rise in defense expenditure of the government of India. Taxes on individual incomes and business profits were increased. During the war, Indian industries expanded and Indian business groups began to demand greater opportunities for development. The war also demanded expansion of British army. In 1917, there was a revolution in Russia, the advent of Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi emerged as a mass leader. He arrived in India in 1915 from South Africa. Gandhi led Indians in non-violent marches against racist restrictions. His South African campaigns had brought him in contact with various types of Indians. He spent his first years traveling throughout the country, understanding the people, their needs, and the overall situation. Now came the Revolt Satyagraha. In 1919, Gandhiji called for Satyagraha against the Revolt Act. The act curbed fundamental rights such as freedom of expression and strengthened police powers. Gandhiji and people of India observed 6 April 1919 as a day of non-violent opposition to the act. Satyagraha Sabhas were set up to launch this movement. In April 1919, there was a number of demonstrations and hartals, which we call strikes, in the country, and the government used brutal measures to suppress them. The Jallianwala Bagh atrocities inflicted by General Dyer in Amritsar on Baisakhi Day, 13th April, were part of this repression. During the Revolt Satyagraha, the participants ensured that Hindus and Muslims were united against British rule. Mahatma Gandhi saw India as a land of all the people who lived in the country, Hindus, Muslims, and those of other religions. Now came Khilafat agitation and the non-cooperation movement. In 1920, the British imposed a harsh treaty on the Turkish Sultan or Khalifa. The leaders of that Khilafat agitation, Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali, initiated a full-fledged non-cooperation movement. Gandhiji supported their movement and urged the Congress to campaign against Jallianwala Bagh massacre, the Khilafat wrong, and demanded Swaraj. The non-cooperation movement gained momentum through 1921 and 22. British titles were surrendered and boycotted the legislature. The imports of foreign clothes fell drastically between 1920 and 22. Large parts of the country were on the brink of formidable revolt. Now came People's Initiative. Some people resisted British rule non-violently. People from different classes and groups interpreted Gandhiji's call on their own manner, protested in ways that were not in accordance with his ideas. In some cases, people linked their movements to local grievances. In Kheda, Gujarat, Patidar peasants organized non-violent campaigns against the high land revenue demand of the British. In coastal Andhra and the interior Tamil Nadu, liquor shops were picketed. In the Guntur district of Andhra Pradesh, tribals and poor peasants staged a number of forest satyagrahas. sometimes sending their cattle into the forest without paying grazing fee. In Sindh, Muslim traders and peasants were very enthusiastic about the Khilafat call. In Bengal, the Khilafat Non Cooperation Alliance gave enormous communal unity and strength to the national movement. In Punjab, the Akali agitation of Sikhs sought to remove corrupt Mahants from their gurdwaras. The People's Mahatma. Gandhiji believed in building class unity, not class conflict. Peasants believed that Gandhi would help them in their fight against zimidars and agricultures. Laborers believed he would provide them land. At the end of a powerful movement, peasants of Pratapgarh in the United Province managed to stop illegal eviction of tenants, but they felt it was Gandhiji who had won this demand for them. The happenings of 1922 to 1929. Mahatma Gandhi called off the non cooperation movement. When the non cooperation movement was over, Gandhi's followers stressed that Congress must undertake constructive work in rural areas. Other leaders argued that the party should fight elections to councils. In 1930, the civil disobedience movement was launched. Two important developments of mid 1920s were the formation of Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh RSS, a Hindu organization, and the Communist Party of India. By the end of decade, the Congress resolved the fight for Purna Swaraj in 1929 under the presidency of Jawaharlal Nehru. Consequently, Independence Day was observed on 26 January 1930 all over the country. Now came the Dandi March. In 1930, Gandhi ji marched to break the salt law. According to the law, the state had a monopoly on the manufacture and sale of the salt. The Salt March related the general desire of freedom to a specific grievance shared by everybody and thus did not divide the rich and the poor. Gandhiji and his followers marched for over 240 miles from Sabarmati to the coastal towns of Dandi, where they broke the government law by gathering natural salt found on the seashore and boiling seawater to produce salt. Peasants, tribals, and women participated in large numbers. The Government of India Act of 1935 prescribed provincial autonomy, and the government announced elections to the provincial legislature in 1937. In September 1939, Second World War broke out. Congress leaders were ready to support the British war effort, but in return they demanded independence. The British refused to concede the demand of Congress ministries, resigned in the protest. And now came the biggest of all, Quit India movement. Mahatma Gandhi initiated a new phase of movement against the British. He wanted the British to quit India immediately. To the people, he said, "Do or die in your effort to fight the British, but non violently." The movement attracted peasants and the youth who gave up their studies to join it. In many areas, people set up their own governments. The first response of the British was severe repression. The rebellion ultimately brought the Raj to its knees. Now came the era where we were heading towards independence and partition. In 1940, the Muslim League demanded independent states for Muslims. From the late 1930s, the League began viewing the Muslims as separate nation from the Hindus. The provincial elections of 1937 convinced the League that Muslims were a minority and they would always have to play second fiddle in any democratic structure. The Congress rejection of the League's desire to form a joint Congress League government in the United Province in 1937 also annoyed the League. At the end of the war in 1945, the British opened negotiations between the Congress, the League, and themselves for independence of India. In 1946, elections to the provinces were held again. The League demanded for Pakistan. In March 1946, the British cabinet sent a three-member mission to Delhi to examine and to suggest a suitable political framework for a free India. The mission suggested that India should remain united and constitute itself as a loose confederation with some autonomy for Muslim majority areas. After the failure of the cabinet mission, the Muslim League decided on mass agitation for winning its Pakistan demand. It was announced on 16th August 1946 as Direct Action Day. By March 1947, violence spread to different parts of the northern India. Partition meant that India changed. Many of its cities changed, and a new country, Pakistan, was born. On your screens, you will see certain statements or questions. Along with that, you have four options. You have to pick the correct options. So, without wasting any time, let's get going. Marathi newspaper Kesari was edited by Lala Lajpat Rai, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Chittaranjan Das, or Sarojini Naidu. It was edited by Bal Gangadhar Tilak. Lala Lajpat Rai was a nationalist from Bengal, Bihar, Punjab, or Haryana. Lala Lajpat Rai was a nationalist from Punjab. Which of the following movement is associated with Chittaranjan Das? Quit India movement, the Salt March, non-cooperation movement, or none of these? Chittaranjan Das is associated with non-cooperation movement. Bengal was divided by British in the year 1900, 1910, 1905 or 1920. Bengal was divided by the British in the year 1905. The Vernacular Press Act was enacted in 1840, 1857, 1878 or 1890. Vernacular Press Act was enacted in 1878. Ilbert Bill was introduced in 1860, 1878, 1883 or 1890. Ilbert Bill was introduced in 1883. Who was the first Indian Governor General of Free India? Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, C. Rajagopalachari or Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. The first Indian Governor General of Free India was C. Rajagopalachari. Now on your screens you can see certain set of words in two different columns. So let's try to match these columns. Knighthood, an honor granted by the British Crown for exceptional personal achievement. Picket, the protest of people outside a building to prevent others, owners, from entering. Mahants, the religious functionaries of Sikh Gurdwaras. Publicist, a person who publishes an idea by circulating information, writing reports, and speaking at meetings. Provincial autonomy, a capacity of the province to make relatively independent decisions while remaining within the federation. Sovereign, the capacity to act independently without interference from outside. Now let's see if these statements are true or false. People were satisfied with British rule in 1870s and 1880s. It is a false statement. The Arms Act was passed in 1875. It is false statement. Arms Act was passed in 1878. Muslim League demanded independent states for Muslims in 1940. It is true. The Congress in the first 20 years of its formation was moderate. True. In 1930, Gandhiji led a march to break the salt law. True. The leaders of Khilafat agitation were Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali. True. Let's try to analyze what we have learnt today. Today's session reminds me of the lines written by Dr. Rabindranath Tagore, the Nobel laureate in literature, where he states that where the mind is without fear and head is held high. The closing lines of this poem states, "Into that heaven of freedom, my father, let my country awake." That was the desire of the people who were living under the rule of Britishers. We have inherited freedom, but are we making use of it? Are we preserving it? Questions are open for discussion. We'll be back with many more videos. Till then, stay safe, stay healthy, keep learning, and always be proud of your country. Namaskar.